Humanity has always been searching for new lands. Now the boundaries have expanded. Our next step leads to Mars, or at the very least, to the Moon. And our ambitions are anything but humble. We don't want to only reach these other worlds. We want to build colonies that will one day become independent. But traveling the cosmic void is only the first part of the challenge. What comes next? We set out to pursue a dream, yet we will face the harshest reality. A colony on another planet isn't just about survival. It's a struggle for resources, technology, and power. In the depths of distant worlds, we may find materials that could redefine our vision of the future. Who will claim these treasures? Who has the right to call them their own? And most importantly, how will they be shared? The new space race has already begun. The space race. In 2020, Elon Musk confidentially declared that his company would land the first human on Mars by 2026. From what we can see, Musk hasn't had any luck so far. And with just 2 years remaining until his predicted date, the prospect of seeing a human on Mars is, to put it mildly, unlikely. Meanwhile, NASA seems to be in no hurry. They're just now planning missions to the Moon, again. But even these missions are constantly being postponed. So what went wrong? In this video, you'll learn, why is it so hard to travel to Mars from Earth? Why have we already traveled to the Moon, but not yet to Mars? How and when is it planned to travel to Mars? How are we going to conquer Mars? What does conquering Mars even mean? For most people, this means, at the very least, to have a person fly there and plant a flag, or to build a base with regularly rotating staff like on the ISS. Or even to terraform Mars, that is, to deliberately change its conditions so much that it would resemble Earth. Whatever people dream about, for now, even flying there and planting a flag is an extremely challenging task. It would be a great achievement if the first interplanetary astronauts managed to reach the red planet, land, and successfully return to Earth. Successfully means alive and preferably more or less healthy. But why is it so difficult? After all, people went to the Moon several times more than half a century ago. Because sending a person to Mars is, to put it mildly, not the same as going to the Moon. This task is incomparably harder. And now we'll show you just how vast this difference is. Let's take a step back to fully comprehend this. A human first set foot on the Moon on July 20th, 1969. And this wasn't a symbolic mission just to plant a flag. People worked there. There were 6 manned missions in total, and 12 people were lucky enough to walk on its surface. It took just 7 years from the goal's announcement in 1962 to the landing of a human on the Moon, which is incredibly fast. The question is, what's wrong with Mars? Why hasn't a single person been there in more than half a century? Despite all his optimism, even Elon Musk said in an interview with entrepreneur and space adventurers co-owner Peter Diamandis, honestly, a bunch of people will probably die in the beginning.
Honestly, a bunch of people probably will die in the beginning. It's tough sledding over there. You know?
We're an exploring species.
So what makes it so difficult? Imagine that you need to walk to a shopping mall 1 kilometre, about 0.6 miles away from your home and back. It would take you about half an hour, or you could comfortably make the trip in slippers and you probably wouldn't get very tired. You certainly wouldn't need to bring sandwiches to have a snack on the way. Now imagine having to walk not 1 kilometre, 0.6 miles, but 140 kilometres, 87 miles, plus the same distance back. That's more than a beeline from New York to Philadelphia. Keep in mind that this route would go through uninhabited terrain with no roads, stores, or people. A regular person wouldn't be able to cover this distance in a day or two. If there are no stores along the way, you'd need to carry food, water, medicine, tools, and a raincoat, sleeping bag, and a tent, because there would be nowhere to buy supplies on the way. If such a traveler breaks a leg halfway, then they're almost certainly doomed. This is roughly how a flight to Mars compares to a flight to the Moon, only many times worse. The distance to the Moon is stable, 384,400 kilometers, about 238,855 miles, while Mars is at least 56 million kilometers, about 34.8 million miles away, which is about 140 times further than the Moon. This is the minimum value because this distance constantly keeps changing, given that planets orbit the Sun at different speeds. At some point, Earth and Mars can end up on opposite sides of the Sun. Then the distance will reach 400 million kilometers, about 248.5 million miles. That's 1,000 times farther than the distance between the Moon and the Earth. In our example with a hiker, this is like walking from New York to Chicago. Mind you, all of this is on foot, and we emphasize on foot for a reason. Considering the size of our solar system and the universe as a whole, the current human space travel is almost at snail's speed. With modern technology, a one-way flight to Mars will take 7 months or even nearly a year. That's because of the distance. The enormous distance is the main issue with a manned mission to Mars, and all other problems come from it. There are plenty of those problems too. During all these months, the crew needs to eat and drink, keep their bodies clean, monitor their health, and perform many daily tasks. They also need to get along with each other in a confined space. All this would happen in a setting with numerous threats, breakdowns, cosmic radiation, and no chance of receiving help from Earth. Even getting simple advice from specialists on Earth will be delayed by 10 or even 20 minutes, depending on the current distance. Can we somehow assess in advance the likelihood of such a mission's success? Well, see for yourself. In over 60 years, 48 missions have been sent towards Mars, including those that didn't even involve landing a probe or rover. Of these, 26 failed. Even the chances of an unmanned mission's success are almost 50-50. You see, even unmanned. Considering all of this, Elon Musk's words about the likely deaths of the first Mars explorers sound frighteningly convincing. And keep in mind that this is coming from Musk, who is widely known for his optimistic take on Mars exploration. But no matter what, humanity does not intend to give up. Therefore, we will stop pessimistic thoughts for today and move on to how the optimists plan to get to Mars. Let's take this journey along with them. First, we'll see how NASA, the most iconic space agency in the world, sees this. So, the first problem is actually taking off, getting out of Earth's powerful gravitational pull. Now, this all depends on how much equipment needs to be taken along. Take a look at this space shuttle that performed manned missions to Earth's orbit. It's a huge rocket, 56 meters, about 183 feet long. But even it looks like a toy compared to the Saturn V that delivered manned missions to the Moon. One can only imagine what a monstrous rocket one would need to lift all the enormous supplies and equipment required for an Earth to Mars mission. To get this into perspective, let's go back to our example with the hiker from the start of the video and complicate it a little bit. Imagine you need to walk those very same 140 kilometers, about 87 miles, through uninhabited terrain with a full supply of food, water, and everything else in your huge, heavy backpack. And now, here's the kicker. The path will be off-road, but on flat terrain. However, the first kilometer must be covered on a very steep slope. So steep that you might not make it to the top. And even if you do, you might collapse at the top, unable to go any further. This roughly describes the scenario of starting a mission to Mars directly from Earth. It's almost impossible to build a rocket that can lift a giant load in one go, fly to Mars with it, and then return. Not to mention landing people on the surface. That's why NASA decided that the first manned mission to Mars won't start from Earth. It makes much more sense to start from a place where there is no strong Earth gravity. Currently, the most accessible option for humanity is to transport all the necessary spacecraft parts, fuel and cargo to orbit in several launches. assemble everything there, and then start the mission. However, NASA decided to go one step further by building a base on the Moon and, simultaneously, a space station in lunar orbit. The idea is that if the spacecraft is launched from space where there's zero gravity, it wouldn't be such an insurmountable task to start the mission to Mars. The station itself can be built in several stages, as the task can be broken down into parts. This is like in our example with the hiker. First, you'd run several times up the mentioned slope to carry provisions, water, and everything else during several trips. You'd then store it all in a simple but built in advance, and only then set off with a heavy backpack, but on flat terrain. Actually, this is a very serious program that has been in development for several years. It's called Artemis, and there has already been a successful flight within its framework. No, we haven't missed anything. People haven't returned to the Moon yet, but humanity is now closer to this goal than it has been in the past 50 years. The Artemis program includes many stages. So far, only the first stage has been successfully completed. In November of 2022, NASA launched the SLS rocket, which was designed based on the technologies of the Saturn V rocket and reusable space shuttle ships. It delivered the Orion spacecraft to the Moon, which was sent without a crew for the first mission. It orbited the Moon and safely returned to Earth. This was the Artemis 1 mission. Artemis 2 will follow the same route but with a crew in September 2025. According to the plan, astronauts will fly to the Moon without landing. During this mission, they'll confirm that all spacecraft systems are fully functional in deep space conditions. The flight is expected to take 10 days, which includes orbiting the Moon. The Artemis 3 mission will involve landing astronauts on the Moon for the first time in half a century. The Orion spacecraft is not designed to land on the Moon, so the lunar spaceship module developed by SpaceX will be used for this task. Orion and the lunar Starship module will meet in lunar orbit. Then the astronauts will transfer to the lunar Starship for the descent to the lunar surface. The astronauts will spend about 7 days on the Moon exploring the South Pole region and establishing a base. This mission will set a record for the longest human stay on the Moon, surpassing the 72-hour mission of Apollo 17. The internal volume of the lunar Starship module would provide much more comfort compared to the Apollo mission vehicles. During the mission, 2 astronauts will conduct several moonwalks, performing various scientific observations, including collecting samples of water ice. Let's try to look even further into the future, when the red planet will be within our arm's reach, in every sense of the word. During Artemis 4, the active stage of constructing the Lunar Gateway Station will begin. This orbital station will go around the Moon and serve as an intermediate point for missions to the lunar surface and eventually to Mars. The first step is the launch of 2 key modules of the future station, the Power and Propulsion Element, PPE, and the Habitation and Logistics Outpost, HALO, on the Falcon Heavy rocket, scheduled for 2027. They'll be sent into space in a single cluster. It will take approximately a year for the modules to reach their target orbit. After completing all necessary checks, the Dragon XL supply ship will be launched to the Gateway following the docking of the lunar Starship, which is designed for landing astronauts on the Moon. After this, the station will finally receive its first visitors, the astronauts of the Artemis 4 expedition. What will happen next? Up until the 11th mission, it will be a complex and exciting yet somewhat routine process. Under the Artemis program, astronauts will build and improve the orbital station mission after mission. They will establish a lunar base on the Moon, develop lunar infrastructure, and run countless tests, experiments, and trials. The objectives will be varied, but the primary goal for all of them will be preparing for a mission to Mars. The 11th Artemis mission is the last one that NASA has officially announced. It's scheduled for 2036. The further we look into the future, the less specific details we have, even from official sources. However, we'll still piece together all the data, all the plans, hypotheses, concepts, and expert opinions to show you the likely course of events. While Artemis missions 4 through 11 will primarily focus on the developing infrastructure on the Moon and its orbit, starting with the 12th mission, the vision of the main goal, the future Mars flight, will start to come into focus. Let's imagine how this might unfold. Now, let's envision Artemis 12. First and foremost, astronaut teams will work on and streamline technologies for obtaining water and oxygen from readily available sources, essentially lunar mineral deposits. Of course, this doesn't mean turning rocks into water. It means finding ways to efficiently process deposits of lunar ice. For this, geological studies will be conducted on the Moon to search for and extract resources, including water ice reserves. By the way, if you want to get ahead of things, oxygen can also be extracted on Mars and not necessarily from water. Recently, the Perseverance Mars rover successfully proved this. It utilized MOXIE, Mars Oxygen In Situ Resource Utilization Experiment, a kit designed to experiment with extracting oxygen from the carbon dioxide in Mars's atmosphere. So the prospects are promising, but let's return to the Moon. What else can be done there to prepare us for a mission to Mars? During Artemis 13, astronauts will likely refine the rapid construction technology. These technologies will be essential for long-term lunar missions, so they'll have to be developed on the Moon first and then transferred to Mars. For this, NASA is exploring innovative approaches. The agency is seriously considering 3D printing as a technology for creating habitats on the Moon and Mars. In 2020, it signed a contract with ICON, a company specializing in innovative construction technologies. The idea of using lunar regolith for building bases and protective structures using 3D printing technology is also being considered. Analog missions will be a crucial component of the subsequent program missions. Starting with Artemis 14 and continuing through Artemis 20, NASA will conduct analog tests on the Moon to evaluate the capabilities of future Martian habitat capsules, suites, and life support systems. NASA plans to use the fission surface power system to generate energy on the Moon. This is a pinnacle of engineering. A power plant capable of converting the energy from uranium atom fission into electrical energy. Essentially, it is a compact nuclear reactor. This system will power the lunar base, providing a stable and reliable energy supply. Several such systems will be implemented so that one system can replace another in case of failure, ensuring the base's additional protection and stable operation. The power output of one nuclear energy system will be 40 kilowatts. Astronauts will also test and develop advanced life support systems. They'll grow plants in special greenhouses and use microbes to recycle waste. The recycling process will produce oxygen and food. For instance, astronauts will be able to use lunar soil in hydroponic setups to grow vegetables, and microbes will help convert organic waste into fertilizers for plants. Astronauts will study the effects of low gravity and radiation on bone mass, as well as the impact of living in confined spaces on mental health. Telescopes will be installed to observe space without the interference of Earth's atmosphere. By the 20th mission, NASA and its partners will have developed the lunar infrastructure enough for astronaut teams to stay there permanently and feel at home. Then we'll take a historic step that'll make the red planet much more accessible and the plans for its colonization much more realistic. We are talking about the construction of the first orbital Martian station in history. Lockheed Martin, the corporation that created the manned Orion spacecraft, presented the Mars Base Camp project in 2016. The concept includes a Martian orbital station that can accommodate up to 6 astronauts. Having a station in Mars orbit will significantly accelerate the process of actually traveling to the red planet. However, before attempting to land on Mars, some conditions must be established for the first explorers. According to NASA's plans, the conquest of Mars will be carried out in 3 stages. So, stage 1. Some equipment will be brought to Mars in advance before humans arrive. These units will be initially delivered from Earth to the lunar station and from there to Mars. It is likely that the fission software power system will be deployed on the Red Planet. Several of these systems will be dropped on the surface. They are the ones that will make the future Martian base energy autonomous and independent of sunlight. Otherwise, any prolonged dust storm could cause significant issues. In addition to the fission surface power systems themselves, fuel supplies and equipment of fuel transfer will be sent to the planet in advance. According to the approximate estimates, the total weight of the essential cargo will be tens of tons. This is orders of magnitude more than any automated mission to Mars ever undertaken. To put this into perspective, the weight of the most advanced and heaviest rover, Perseverance, is just over 1 ton, 2,260 pounds. According to NASA's concept, special heavy-duty cargo landers designed to carry 25 tons will be used for such cargo missions. Cargo landers are spacecraft designed to deliver goods to other planets or moons. In the second stage, a special module called the Mars Ascent Vehicle, MAV, will be sent to Mars's surface. This vehicle is designed to bring astronauts back to Mars's orbit. It will be a relatively compact structure equipped with rocket engines capable of overcoming Mars's relatively low gravity and carrying people and cargo into orbit. Finally, in the third stage, astronauts will fly to Mars from the lunar station aboard the Deep Space Transport spacecraft equipped with the Transit Habitat module. The Transit Habitat is a living module that provides astronauts with sleeping quarters, work and rest areas, air and water regeneration systems, and radiation protection for long space missions. It will take 10 months to reach Mars. Then 2 people will descend to Mars while 2 remain on the orbital station. The astronauts will use a specialized landing module to descend to the planet's surface. This module will be pre-delivered to Mars's orbit and ready for use when the crew arrives in orbit. Essentially, this will be both a vehicle and a home for the astronauts. NASA's idea was to combine the first Martian home and transport vehicle into one rover equipped with an air supply system. This is all about optimization to reduce the number of items needed for landing on the surface. The agency has been working on creating this rover for a long time and has even conducted extensive prototype testing on Earth. In the sealed rover, which resembles a van, there will be everything the astronauts will need to live and work for several weeks. They'll be able to travel around Mars, inside it, wearing comfortable clothing instead of bulky spacesuits, which they'll only need to wear outside the vehicle. This futuristic-looking machine will be designed for 2 to 4 crew members. The rover will have several functional compartments, including medical, exercise and storage areas, as well as a gallery and crew cabins. The life support systems and the environment will be designed in general for 30 to 60 days of fully autonomous operation. After landing on the Red Planet, the astronauts will conduct research. Naturally, they'll take numerous soil samples. Okay, we've figured out the astronauts' descent to Mars. But how will they get back into space and return home? Here's how it's going to happen. Having collected Mars samples, the crew will fly to the planet's orbit on the MAV, which was sent to the Red Planet during the second stage. The crew will spend about 2.5 Martian days, around 60 hours, traveling to the orbital station, where the deep space transport with the Transit Habitat module will be pre-docked. After docking, the crew and cargo will transfer to the Transit Habitat and the MAV will be discarded. Next, the deep space transport will set out for a long trip back to Earth, which will take approximately 17 months. The Orion spacecraft will meet it once it reaches high Earth orbit. Orion will take all 4 crew members and land them safely on Earth. Now, let's take a look at the entire Mars flight epic in the grand scheme of things. The fact that spacecraft carrying astronauts to Mars will be launched from lunar orbit rather than from Earth or the Moon itself makes the whole launch process much easier. Do you remember our example with the cabin at the top and the hiker? Indeed, packing your backpack at the top and travelling over flat terrain is much easier than hauling it up in one go. But there's one caveat. This life hack doesn't eliminate the vast distance that one still needs to cover. We can travel to Mars only at specific times, when the planet is at a certain distance. After all, planets don't stand still, they move around the Sun. And since the spacecraft will be traveling for many months, the trajectory must be calculated so that both the spacecraft and Mars literally meet at one point in the shortest possible time. There are only two such windows of opportunity, and they imply different trajectories, namely conjunction class and opposite class. A conjunction class trajectory requires less fuel due to the use of convenient launch windows for the outbound and return trips. However, it requires a lot of time, around 900 to 1,000 days, with about 400 and 600 of those days spent on Mars. An opposition class trajectory, on the other hand, requires more fuel but reduces the expedition time to 560 to 700 days, and people stay on Mars to about 30 to 90 days. The difference in fuel costs is significant, more than threefold. Therefore, at first, NASA did not consider the opposition class trajectory as a viable option. However, in recent years, this perspective has changed. The new MTAS study of 2023 exclusively examines the opposition class mission concept. For the first manned expeditions to Mars, it's crucial to reduce the risks of equipment failure and cruise radiation exposure, both of which increase with the mission's duration. In this regard, the opposition class expedition has a significant advantage. Interestingly, this trajectory involves performing a gravity assist flyby near Venus. It might even seem peculiar to get to Mars faster, one must fly to Venus, which is in the opposite direction, but that's how orbital mechanics work. Sometimes quite strangely and unexpectedly. So now we have the full picture of how humans will conquer Mars in the future, both in general and in detail. The question remains, when? When will a living person set foot on the planet? At the time of this video's release, NASA's current announcement and forecasts indicated that the Artemis program would reach its final stage with a manned landing on Mars by 2039. However, given the shifting timelines of Artemis 2, the actual date for a manned mission to Mars might be postponed much further. It's impossible to predict this. There are too many unknowns in this equation. One thing's clear. Every step forward in the moon exploration brings us closer to the next big step for humanity: life on the red planet. And when that day comes, a question arises: what kind of spacecraft will take us there? Our favorite sci-fi movies always feature spaceships that look stunning, but reality always disappoints us. Space travelers face cramped spaces and minimal amenities. However, Elon Musk's SpaceX with its Starship has seriously decided to change this. The ship is the embodiment of humanity's wildest dreams. What will its interior look like, and when will we finally be able to conquer Mars in it? You will learn all of this and much more in our today's video. What does the SpaceX Starship look like inside?
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
In all the history of space exploration, the Saturn V rocket, which flew to the moon, proudly held the title of the largest rocket. It was unrivaled until the Starship appeared. This giant consists of two parts: the booster, which is the 71-meter SpaceX Super Heavy rocket, and the 50.3-meter Starship. When assembled, the entire structure stands at 121 meters. That's 398 feet tall. That's 10 meters taller than the Saturn V rocket and almost 30 meters taller than the Statue of Liberty, including its pedestal. The rocket's diameter is 9 meters, 30 feet. For comparison, the diameter of the usual SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket is only 3.7 meters, 12 feet. The fully fueled tandem of Super Heavy and Starship weighs approximately 5,000 tons. That's more than 100 Boeing 737 planes, together with passengers and luggage. So what kind of engine is needed to lift such a huge weight into the air? Well, it certainly wouldn't just be one engine. In fact, the Super Heavy rocket is equipped with a whopping 33 Raptor engines, also designed by SpaceX, and that is just the rocket, as the Starship itself has 6 additional engines, 3 larger ones for flights in space vacuum, and 3 smaller ones for taking off and landing in the atmosphere. The fuel used is a mixture of methane and oxygen, and that's no accident. This is designed with the future in mind. Both of these components can be extracted from Mars's atmosphere. In terms of structure, the Starship is one continuous innovation. To reiterate, nothing like this has existed before. But in addition to engineering marvels, we shouldn't forget about another ambitious plan of Elon Musk. Starship will not just be a ship that can reach Mars, but one that can do so while ensuring maximum comfort. And there's more to it than just words. SpaceX has already proven with outstanding persuasiveness that space flights can really look like what we've seen in the most idealistic sci-fi movies. Take a look at the conditions in the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. The Space Shuttle cabin had somewhat better conditions. But the Space Shuttle program is closed, and for a while, it was unclear whether there would ever be a worthy match. But it has been found. Its name is Dragon 2 in the crewed version of Crew Dragon, a reusable spacecraft created by Elon Musk's company. Here's what it looks like on the outside. And here's what it looks like inside with the crew. A lot of space, visual appeal, comfort, and futuristic aesthetics. All of this is as close to sci-fi as possible. And it already works. Since 2020, the Crew Dragon series of ships have made a total of 7 manned flights to the ISS and even carried civilian space tourists. And this doesn't include cargo missions. So, the Starship, with its full height of 121 meters, is about 14 times larger than Crew Dragon, which is just a tiny 8.1 meters. In fact, any other spacecraft that people have ever flown on, whether to orbit or even to the moon, looks like a bug compared to Starship. Just take a look. The interior concept of the ship is still being developed, but even preliminary presentations give an idea what it will be. And it is, to put it mildly, impressive. Since we mentioned Crew Dragon and noted that it seems to have come out of a sci-fi movie, we can't help but say that things will be much cooler in the case of Starship. No, unfortunately, it's naive to expect luxurious apartments like on the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek. But it will still be much better than even Crew Dragon. And here comes the immediate question. How many people will be comfortable on a long flight in Starship? The declared specifications, in all seriousness, include the figure of 100 people. Technically, this might be possible, but certainly not on the first flights. Let us remind you that from the crew's perspective, a flight to Mars means at least 6 months spent in a metal box, airtight like a can. Any reasonable person would want this can to be more spacious. But here, it's important to maintain a balance. If there are too many people, a lack of personal space will lead to tension between crew members. But if the crew is too small, there'll also be problems because people may quickly get sick of each other. This is a serious issue, and ISS crews are already selected with psychological compatibility in mind. Most specialists agree that 10 people is roughly the optimal number of crew members for such a long flight, even on a large ship like Starship. Elon Musk will surely be disappointed, but all evidence suggests that 100 people is really a bad idea. Now imagine that we are part of the crew traveling to Mars. Let's see what awaits us and where we'll live. Okay, let's go through the internal structure of Starship, starting from the bottom. At the very bottom are the engines, above them the fuel tanks and all the main equipment. This takes up about half the volume of the ship. So the 50 meters of Starship's length, about 25 meters, are left for us. However, according to some worst-case estimates, the usable part of the ship will be around 17 meters long. These figures don't seem too far-fetched. In fact, this is about the length of an average residential building. Starship will actually have several floors inside. There'll be at least 6 levels. Even in the worst-case scenario, where we'll have only 17 meters at our disposal, the ceiling height will be about 2.8 meters. This is quite normal even for a regular person living in the city, and for a modern space traveler, this is a dream come true. So let's start with the first, lowest level. Here we'll most likely have the cargo bay where all the equipment, including the habitable Mars rover, will be stored. There'll also be all the life support systems and other heavy equipment. The second level is a place where food supplies, medicines and other household consumables would probably be stored. Some even suggest an idea to make a hydroponic garden on this level to grow live greenery. If we manage to grow something on a spaceship, there's a chance we could one day do it on Mars. The third level can be fully equipped as a gym and bathroom. This is absolutely essential for astronauts. Even on the ISS, there are large strength training machines, and their sizes are impressive. Considering how valuable every kilogram delivered into orbit is, rest assured this huge machine was brought here for a reason. Without such training in zero gravity, a person will very quickly suffer muscle atrophy, as well as bone thinning and degradation. Unfortunately, it won't be possible to take a shower after such a workout. Not just because one needs to save water, although that's also the case, but because water doesn't flow in zero gravity. Thus, astronauts will have to make do with wiping down with wet towels and using dry shampoo to wash their hair. Indeed, such shampoos are specifically made for astronauts and other professionals working in extreme conditions. The same goes for the toilet. Orbital toilet designs are constantly being improved, although there's little room for engineering creativity in zero-gravity conditions. But for Starship, they promised to come up with something even newer and more convenient than on the ISS or Crew Dragon. The fourth level will include the rest areas. Something like a bedroom, but which will still provide a separate space for each crew member. Most likely it will be done based on the capsule hostel principle. They first appeared in Japan and were later adopted by some other countries. The fifth level would be an excellent place for common use. A sort of hall to hang out together, look at the stars and stretch out by floating from one wall to the other. Perhaps this is where the largest observation window will be. At least, even in the official designs, there are windows placed in a semicircle closer to the nose of the Starship. It's just like scenes from our favorite sci-fi movies, right? Because of the tapering of the Starship's cone, the sixth level will be significantly smaller than the lower levels, making it an optimal space for the command deck. This both makes sense and looks like from a movie. We're used to seeing the captain's bridge at the front of the spaceship, even though it can be anywhere. This comes from maritime traditions, much like the terminology. After all, we call spacecraft ships, even though they have virtually nothing in common with sea vessels. All levels will be connected by something resembling an elevator, but without a lifting mechanism. In fact, it will be a hollow column in the form of a hole that goes through all the floors. In zero gravity, astronauts will simply fly through this makeshift tube, easily reaching the desired floor. And stairs can be used when Starship lands on the Moon or Mars? Well, all this looks quite impressive, but by and large, there's nothing entirely fantastical about it. Challenging, yes. Unrealistic, no. But the question remains, what will power all of this? Literally, where will the energy come from for all these life support systems, electronics, and so on? The first obvious energy source is solar panels. Solar energy is quite suitable for flights from Earth to Mars, although it may be insufficient for Starship's energy-intensive systems. Elon Musk also proposes using Powerwall battery packs. Solar panels can charge them, providing energy for all systems. However, these packs are quite heavy, which creates an issue for space flights. The most promising option remains hydrogen fuel cells, which convert hydrogen into electricity and produce water. This technology was already used in the Apollo missions. One only needs to maximize its efficiency for long flights. In any case, whatever the energy challenges on board Starship may be, they seem quite solvable. Of course, all of this is very intriguing, but isn't it time we got the answer to the most pressing question? How this miracle will be implemented? Are these starships even being built? They certainly are. Moreover, they're already flying, at least they're trying to. As of July 2024, 4 test launches of the complete set, the Super Heavy rocket with the Starship, have already been performed, and each one has been better than the previous one. During the 4th test launch, the Starship was able to successfully separate from the Super Heavy rocket, reach orbit, make a loop, and even perform a flip maneuver for vertical landing. And the first stage successfully landed, fired its engines, and, as planned, descended into the ocean. So, progress is indeed here. Who knows, maybe right now, in one of SpaceX's workshops, workers are welding the hull of the ship for travel to Mars. And maybe you, personally, will travel on it as a regular tourist. But before we go to Mars, we must conquer another space body. The Moon. Why? Hey, what are you up to right now? I guess you're sitting in your warm room, possibly eating some snacks. Maybe drinking tea, coffee or juice. Simple treats, huh? I bet. But as with everything on our planet, it's not as simple as it seems. All of this wouldn't be possible if, at some point, we didn't realize how to mine all the energy resources that bring us comfort and warmth in the modern age. For instance, oil and coal. Demand for them only increases every year, but the resources tend to run out. Not to scare you, but it's predicted that fossil fuels will be finished already in this century. Oil can last up to 50 years, natural gas up to 53 years, coal 114 years. So most probably our generation is safe. But what are we going to do next? Is there anything that can help us to create a sufficient amount of energy? Actually, there is. It contains a lot more potential energy than any fossil fuel. 1 ton of that material produces the same amount of energy as 50 million barrels of oil. Okay, just to be more clear, imagine 500 kilos of this material can produce 5 gigawatts of clean, ecological energy, 24 hours a day for 1 year, for a city with around 3 million inhabitants. This precarious thing is called helium-3. So why are we still relying on gas, oil and coal? Well, there's one tiny detail that we haven't told you about. We can get that gas only on the Moon. Humanity knew about this for some time already, and seems like that sparks another space race right now. Countries fighting for their place on the Moon. Seems like a scenario for an upcoming blockbuster. But who can tell if that's already, in fact, the reality? I bet you have a ton of questions. I mean, this whole idea of mining on the Moon seems strange, if not full-time crazy. Now, how exactly are we going to get that strange gas on the Moon? We could hardly walk on the Moon more than 50 years ago. And now suddenly we're going back there to start mining. Maybe it would be much wiser to search for alternative sources on Earth. Why should we spend ridiculous amounts of money on those kind of space races? Are we sure that the potential space mining of helium-3 will actually pay off? In this video, we'll tell you everything you need to know about the power of helium-3, what exactly humanity is doing right now to get it, and how the countries want to take over the one and only satellite of the planet Earth and its resources. Get prepared to learn everything you need to know about the space race of the 21st century. The new space race. Why do countries want to colonize the moon? Okay, let's start with the main question. Why exactly we can't just stay on Earth and search for alternative resources here? And why should we spend that much money? Wouldn't it be better to spend it on new hospitals, shelters? Why do we always spend so many resources on things we're not even so sure about? Well, here I would like to suggest diving into history for a moment. Just imagine this. It's the year 1803. The young nation, the United States. The Western territories are yet uncharted. The whole knowledge about those parts of North America was learned from the French traders, fur trappers, and also Spanish and British explorers. However, the president at the time, Thomas Jefferson, had a grand vision to explore the vast unknown. He hoped to establish trade with Native American people of the West and find a water route to the Pacific. Also, Jefferson wanted to uncover invaluable information about the natural resources and geography. And so he asked Congress for $2,500 to fund the exploration of the western part of America. Just a year later, in 1804, the epic adventure started. A team of volunteers led by Captain Meriwether Lewis and his close friend, Second Lieutenant William Clark, headed to the west. They navigated through uncharted territory, meticulously mapping the land, getting to know Native American tribes. They recorded 178 plants and 122 animals not previously known to science. After over 2 years of travel, the expedition reached the Pacific Ocean in November 1805, becoming the first American expedition to cross the continent. The Lewis and Clark expedition brought back a treasure trove of information that greatly expanded the understanding of the Western territories. Their detailed maps, scientific observations, and accounts of Native American cultures opened up new possibilities for trade, settlement, and westward expansion. It opened up the opportunity to build new settlements and a railway later on. Nobody knew what was going to happen with the expedition, but Americans took the risk and it was rewarded. Just like that, many great achievements in human history became possible because of our insatiable curiosity and our willingness to push boundaries. From medical discoveries to technological innovations, curiosity has always been the driving force behind our advancements. Taking risks and venturing into the unknown have paved the way for new discoveries and shaped the course of history. All right, that's true, but all of these things happened on Earth. Now we are talking about the colonization of the moon. I mean, that is a valid point. We didn't even explore the Earth fully. More than 80% of our ocean is unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. Why exactly do we need to spend billions of dollars to explore the moon and get helium-3 there? Aren't there enough sources of renewable energy? Well, about that. Truly, in recent years, solar power and wind power have gained significant attention as promising alternatives to traditional fossil fuels. Obviously, they have a lot of advantages. They are clean, abundant, and have the potential of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate change. But despite all of this, relying solely on solar power and wind power as the exclusive sources of energy may not be a comprehensive solution to our needs. One limitation of solar power is its dependence on sunlight. Solar panels generate electricity when the sunlight is available, but their efficiency can be affected by many factors such as weather conditions, latitude, and time of day. In regions with frequent cloud cover or long winters, solar power is less reliable and efficient as a primary energy source. Similarly, wind power also has its limitations. Wind turbines require consistent and strong winds to efficiently generate electricity. In order to achieve a sustainable and reliable energy future, we need a balanced approach that combines various sources. And in that sense, helium-3 is just perfect. Okay, now finally let's understand what is helium-3 and why. We so desperately crave it. Basically, it's a rare isotope of helium. It is different from the more common helium-4. It has one less neutron in its nucleus, therefore it's lighter. Now, the reason why helium-3 gained so much attention as its high energy yield and low environmental impact. When fused with another isotope such as deuterium, it can release a tremendous amount of energy. Another big advantage, unlike traditional nuclear power, it does not produce long-lived radioactive waste that requires complex disposal procedures. Sounds perfect, but why couldn't we just find it somewhere on Earth? Well, and here comes the biggest disadvantage of this isotope. Tiny problem. We can't exactly get helium-3 on Earth. Yeah, not like we don't have it all. At least that's what the geochemical evidence indicates. But the majority of it seems to be very deep down in our Earth, in the core. At this moment, we can't get there. The temperature is too high and we don't have the technology to go down that deep. However, we do have the capacity to go to the space. Potentially, we can start mining helium-3 there, and fortunately for us, we can find this isotope on one of the closest space objects, the Moon. But how exactly did Moon get all the helium-3 and we have, nothing? Well, there's a very simple explanation for this. Helium-3 is emitted by the Sun within its solar winds. Our atmosphere prevents any of it from arriving on Earth. But the Moon is less lucky in that sense. Nothing protects it. So for billions of years, the Moon has been bombarded by solar winds containing helium-3. And that's how it has all those massive volumes of the precious isotope. Some estimates suggest that there are at least 1.1 million metric tons of helium-3 on the lunar surface. That's enough to power human energy needs for up to 10,000 years. But it's not all about helium-3. The Moon has another important resource: water. You've probably already heard that our satellite has water on its surface. NASA found evidence of water in certain areas on the Moon in the 1990s. Later they found hydrogen in soil samples from the Apollo missions. In 2020, NASA's SOFIA mission provided evidence that water is present on the sunlit area of the lunar surface. Another important discovery was made during China's lunar mission. Chang'e 5 lander brought back to Earth a soil sample in which scientists found H2O. But it wasn't in the form we're all used to seeing. The Moon water was trapped inside tiny beads of glass. But however did water appear on the Moon? If there was water, then isn't it possible that there were living organisms on the Moon? Or maybe they're still there? Well, it's highly unlikely. But scientists are still trying to understand where the water on the Moon comes from and how it behaves. They think that the water might have come from past and recent impacts by comets, collisions with icy micrometeorites, and reactions between lunar dust and the solar wind. However, further research is much needed if we want to gain a complete understanding of the Moon's water history, current state, and future prospects. And we definitely need more Moon soil samples for that. One thing's certain, extracting water on the Moon will help us in our future space missions, and here's how. Today, space missions are launched from Earth. To enter the orbit, the spacecraft needs to be going about 11 kilometers or 7 miles per second, or over 40,000 kilometers per hour, 25,000 miles per hour. This is necessary to overcome the force of gravity on the planet. Any rocket leaving the Earth carries a supply of fuel to fly to its destination and, if necessary, to return back. And here lies the main problem. In some modern rockets, fuel takes up sometimes about 98% of the mass of the spacecraft. For example, for the 1969 Apollo mission, the rocket that achieved one small step for a man and one giant leap for mankind held just under 950,000 gallons of fuel. If scientists could refuel the spaceship in orbit, then it would be able to accommodate more people and cargo. Now, the force of gravity on the Moon is 6 times lower than on Earth. This means that the rocket will need less fuel to overcome the gravity of our satellite. This makes the Moon very attractive from a technical point of view, but what about water? Well, if we figure out how to extract the water on the Moon, then it can be processed to produce hydrogen-oxygen rocket fuel. Basically, if we have a station on our satellite, then we can send the spacecraft from the Earth with the minimum amount of fuel. Then we can refuel the spaceship on the moon with the hydrogen-oxygen fuel made right on the spot. The construction of a refueling station will decrease the mass of the ship. Also, it will help significantly reduce the cost of deep space missions. And also, we will need much less fuel since the force of gravity on the moon is lower. No wonder so many countries want to have a station on the moon. So, who's going to be the first one to start mining helium-3 and extracting water on the moon? Well, humanity is set in the exploration stage. But even now, it's all giving new space race vibes. Do you remember the one we had before? Most of us don't, but well, history tends to repeat itself. The previous space race was a 20th century competition between two Cold War rivals, the United States and the Soviet Union. Each country was trying to achieve significant milestones in space exploration. Unfortunately, that also included the ultimate goal of landing humans on the moon. It began in the late 1950s when the Soviet Union successfully launched the first artificial satellite Sputnik into orbit in 1957. This event triggered a sense of urgency in the United States to catch up and surpass the Soviet Union in space exploration. The space race escalated with various achievements and milestones, including the first manned spaceflight by Yuri Gagarin in 1961. In response to these Soviet successes, US President John F. Kennedy announced in 1961 the goal of sending astronauts to the moon and safely returning them to Earth before the end of the decade. The moon landing of Apollo 11 in 1969 was a significant milestone in human history and a major achievement for the United States. The race ultimately concluded with the joint US-Soviet mission Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975. That marked the beginning of a new era of international cooperation in space exploration. But now, almost 50 years later, seems like the game is on. Again. But this time, there's another big player. China. Its Chang'e program is a multi-phase mission to study the moon's geology, topography, and resources, as well as conduct experiments and tests for future crewed missions. The program has included orbiters, landers, rovers, and sample return spacecrafts. However, other countries are also actively pursuing lunar missions, with plans for manned and unmanned missions soon. Russia will launch its first lunar space mission in modern times on July 13, 2023. It's also important to mention that in 2021, China and Russia announced they would be building a moon base together. But the USA and NASA never sleep. They have bigger plans with their upcoming Artemis 3 mission, and as NASA claims, it has a significant role for the whole humanity. Currently, the mission is scheduled for 2025. It will mark a historic moment as humanity's first return to the lunar surface in over 50 years. NASA's mission will explore the region near the lunar South Pole, opening up new frontiers in lunar exploration and paving the way for future space exploration endeavors. Once on the lunar surface, the crew will conduct a range of scientific experiments, explore the terrain, and test new technologies designed to support long-duration human exploration missions. It will also include the deployment of scientific instruments such as seismometers and drilling equipment. The experiments aim to study the moon's geology and better understand the early history of our solar system. NASA sees Artemis as the next big step towards the long-term goal of establishing a sustainable presence on the moon. In 2028, they plan on launching the Lunar Surface Asset, a small habitat on the surface of the moon. Very ambitious and well, kind of scary. It seems like politics are already a thing even in space. You can tell that the fight for the resources of the moon has already low-key started. And not only for the moon's treasures, but for all of space. Space race, something we've already faced before. Back in the 20th century, the Soviet Union and the USA were the two main competitors in the race to explore space. The race was fueled by political tensions between the two superpowers during the Cold War. It led to some major milestones in the space exploration, which eventually led to the first manned spaceflight to the moon in 1969. Now it seems like the human race is going to face another challenge, and this time it's China and USA. Both of them have some serious missions prepared for the moon. At this point, it may seem like just a harmless competition to us. But is it so? The moon has some valuable resources that can potentially provide us with energy for at least 10,000 years. Obviously, every country wants to have access to them. But you know how it works. No resources were ever accessed without an actual fight. The question is the new space race going to be a new space war? In this video, we'll tell you everything about the USA's dominance in space and how other countries try to shatter it. We'll learn who actually owns the moon, the stars, and if you can actually buy yourself one. Spoiler, not really. Together we'll learn everything about the current state of politics in space and what exactly the billionaires have to do with that. Shall we? Space Race 2.0. Who owns space? Okay, so let's start with the moon. We all remember how Americans planted the American flag there. Does it mean that whoever reached it first owns it? Well, if it was that easy, no country or individual can claim ownership of the moon or any other celestial body like planets, asteroids, or stars. That means the moon belongs to all of humanity, and no one can go and plant a flag on it to claim it as their own. However, this doesn't mean that no one can use the moon. And as you may already know, many countries are planning missions to the moon to conduct research and exploration. But wait. But if no one can own stars, how are some companies selling them? While some claim to sell star naming services, the truth is that buying a star is not really possible. The International Astronomical Union, which is the only organization responsible for officially naming celestial bodies, doesn't recognize the commercial sale of star names. All those fancy certificates and coordinates you receive are just for fun and don't hold any scientific or legal weight. If you previously bought a star, you can't really go to the nearest observatory and ask them to show you your star. It's all symbolic. But you know what isn't? Space Forces. Yep, this is a reality. The Space Force was created by the United States in December 2019, when the then President Donald Trump signed the National Defense Authorization Act. It established the US Space Force as the sixth branch of the United States Armed Forces. Now, fun fact. The people who work in the Space Force are called Guardians. That's right, they're not just regular old soldiers or airmen. They're just like guardians of the galaxy. The Space Force's motto is Semper Supra, which means always above. And look at their uniform. This 6-button double-breasted tunic drew comparisons to the costumes worn in the sci-fi series Battlestar Galactica. Moreover, the Space Force even has its own official seal. Its symbol, the Delta, signifies the service's responsibilities and also honors its long history. Yep, you heard it right. Long history. It all started back in 1954 when the US Air Force created a special group to take care of the military's ballistic missiles. Over time, this division changed and merged with other organizations as the US was putting more and more satellites in space for communication and missile warnings. In 1982, the Air Force created the first operational space command in the US military, Air Force Space Command. From there, the Department of Defense continued to build up its space capabilities, which eventually led to the creation of the Space Force. So basically, the Space Force is the newest addition to a long line of organizations that have been working to keep the US safe in space for almost 70 years. No kidding, that's an extremely serious organization. Although its name and basically everything connected to it has sci-fi movie vibes. But I guess you still have some questions about their responsibilities. Yeah, not like they are aliens to fight with. So what's their main role? Well, let's hear their answer. Access to freedom to operate in space underpins our national security and economic prosperity. However, space is no longer free from conflict. Potential adversaries are seeking ways to deny the US access to the space capabilities fundamental to our way of war and modern way of life. They have developed an array of threats both on Earth and in orbit that continue to grow in scope, scale and complexity. Today, the guardians of the USSF have been called to protect and defend American interests and to ensure our forces, our allies and the world never experience a day without space. So the Space Force, unlike NASA, focuses more on enhancing the modern military's capabilities and effectiveness rather than research. From satellite operations to intelligence, the Space Force Guardians play a significant role in our daily lives as civilians. For instance, the Space Force operates 32 GPS satellites, and GPS is a widely used service that many of us depend on in our daily routines. So the Space Force is always present and contributing to our daily lives even if we don't realize it. Of course, all of this is not exactly cheap. The US Space Force has requested a $30 billion budget for 2024, which is $3.9 billion more than what it received in 2023. And over 60% of that budget, which is approximately $19.2 billion, is going straight into research, development, testing, and evaluation. That means they're pouring in big bucks to make the Space Force even better, faster, and more effective. You may think that $30 billion is not that much, but that's until you compare it with the other military departments of the US. Overall, there are going to be around 9,600 Guardians in Space Forces in 2024, and they are going to receive $30 billion. Now, the other branches have around 614,000 people, and they're going to receive $255.8 billion. Let's do the math. $3,125,000 per person on Space Forces versus $416,000 per person in other departments. The difference is huge, and you may question why. Well, right now there are a lot of technologies in the sky that are protecting US national interests. For example, there are early warning satellites that are designed to rapidly detect ballistic missile launches and enable defense military action. Of course, you want systems like this to run smoothly, and it's Space Force's job to ensure that. Feels like the USA is practically trying to create some kind of monopoly in space. But what about the other countries? Well, in general, there's something called the Outer Space Treaty that was created to protect space from any kind of ownership. Does it actually have any power? Well, let's see. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 was the first attempt to create a peaceful arrangement of space activities. The treaty was signed by the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, among others. It states that outer space is not subject to national appropriation, meaning that no country can claim ownership of celestial bodies like the Moon. The treaty also prohibits the placement of weapons of mass destruction in orbit or on celestial bodies. Was it successful? Well, in some ways, yes. The treaty has been ratified by over 100 countries. However, there have been some challenges and criticisms, such as the lack of enforcement mechanisms. Nonetheless, the Outer Space Treaty remains an important landmark of international space law. Although we should acknowledge that it's just a general framework for the exploration and the use of outer space which doesn't address specifically many issues. Unlike the Moon Treaty that was proposed in 1979, this one tried to establish a framework where space resources would be considered the common heritage of mankind. And that means that any resources extracted from celestial bodies such as the Moon should be shared equally. The treaty would also have required countries to share technology and scientific knowledge related to the exploration and use of celestial bodies. Basically, as critics say, it was some kind of socialistic agreement. But for space, as you may have already guessed, the United States, Russia and China did not sign such a treaty. and that contributed to its limited adaptation and implementation. To this day, only 18 states are parties to this treaty. However, in May 2020, the United States proposed another set of principles promoting peaceful and cooperative exploration of the Moon and other celestial bodies. Artemis Accords, and this one seems to be more successful. The main aim of the Artemis Accords is to establish a framework for international cooperation and transparency in space exploration. The principles include commitments to peaceful exploration, sustainable use of resources, and the sharing of scientific data. All of this sounds great, but let's take a look at the document. For example, Section 8. And what do we see here? The signatories are committed to the open sharing of scientific data. The signatories plan to make the scientific results obtained from cooperative activities under these accords available to the public and the international scientific community as appropriate in a timely manner. Well, nothing wrong with that, but let's read further. The commitment to openly share scientific data is not intended to apply to private sector operations unless such operations are being conducted on behalf of a signatory to the accords. Yep. So it's not a coincidence that there are so many private sector companies in the US doing research in this sphere. And Elon Musk with his SpaceX and big ambition to organize a flight to Mars soon. All of this makes even more sense now. 'Cause, well, in the case of private companies, they don't have to share the scientific data with others. Nevertheless, the accords were signed on the 13th of October 2020 by representatives of the national space agencies of 8 countries: Australia, Canada, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Then additional signatories include Ukraine, South Korea, New Zealand, Brazil, Poland, Mexico, Israel, Romania, Bahrain, Singapore, Colombia, France, Saudi Arabia, Rwanda, and Nigeria, which makes it 22 countries. But I guess you noticed that one huge country is not on the list, or even 2. China and Russia, of course. Already in 2020, the Artemis Accords received some heavy criticism from those countries. Particularly, it was said that the accords are too centered on American and commercial interests. Russia has condemned them as a blatant attempt to create international space law that favors the United States. At the same time, Chinese government-affiliated media has called the accords akin to European colonial enclosure land-taking methods. Russia and China have since reached an understanding to work together on the Chinese International Lunar Research Station concept, which is particularly for third parties like India, a possibly competing proposal to choose from. Do you feel those space race vibes? I would even say space war vibes. But is China a serious competitor in the space matters? Well, it seems so. Artemis is not only an agreement, it's also a huge space program with many important missions. NASA sees Artemis as the next big step towards the long-term goal of establishing a sustainable presence on the Moon. In 2025, they plan to land the first woman and the first person of color on the surface of the Moon. And already in 2028, they plan on launching the Lunar Surface Asset, a small habitat on the surface of the Moon. Being the first in the space race is extremely important for the USA. Before ordering the establishment of a 6th branch of the military, the Space Force, Donald Trump said, "It's not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have an American dominance in space." And that pretty much describes the US policy in space. But then China got involved. In recent years, the country has been actively involved in the exploration of the Moon through its lunar exploration program called Chang'e, named after the Chinese moon goddess. It's basically a multi-phase mission with the aim of studying the Moon's geology, topography, and resources, as well as conducting experiments and tests for future crewed missions. And it seems to be very successful. In 2014, China has achieved landing on the moon with Chang'e 3, China's first lunar rover. 5 years later, in 2019, the first soft landing on the far side of the moon took place. This was Chang'e 4 mission. At that time, Chang'e's lander carried a rover named Yutu-2, which was actively exploring the lunar surface. But the upcoming missions of Chang'e are even more impressive. Chang'e 8 is going to test the technology necessary for the construction of a lunar science base. It is set for 2028. The country also plans to conduct a crewed lunar landing mission in the 2030s. Russia also has some missions planned, although they are less significant. It will launch its first lunar space mission in modern times on July 13, 2023. Luna 25, the first domestically produced spacecraft of this type in post-Soviet Russia, will land on the surface of the Earth's satellite. The purpose of this project is to send a robotic probe to conduct research near the Moon's south pole. And China and Russia announced in 2021 that they will be building a moon base together. The countries also formally invited more countries and international organizations to join their International Lunar Research Station as a competitor to the American Artemis. Will the space race between the US, China and Russia lead to an all-out space war, or will we see peaceful cooperation and collaboration for the greater good of humanity at some point? Well, the bets are on, the stakes are high and the competition is fierce. Perhaps as we continue to explore and understand the vastness of space, we'll come to realize that our differences pale in comparison to the infinite possibilities and wonders that lie beyond our planet. But that sounds too optimistic. Honestly, it's highly unlikely that any nation at this point is ready to give up its own ambitions. In the next few years, we'll see what exactly this competition brings us. One thing is clear. Space exploration and development will continue to be a major focus for China and the USA, shaping our understanding of the universe and our place in it. But as nations move further into space, another question arises. Not only about who controls space, but also about how it will be used. Hey you! Yes, you behind the screen. Look away for a moment. Check out your surroundings. Tell me, what do you see? Notice the smallest things? Bolts, pins, keys, forks, knives, jewelry. Think about the objects that you don't see, which are definitely there. The wires, parts of the device that you currently use to watch this video. Many of those items are made from different metals. We all take them for granted. Every day we use and buy metal objects. Thankfully, we have all the necessary resources to mine those materials. But did you ever think about the real cost of the mining process? You may think, well, I paid for all those things. Absolutely, you did. But there's a bigger price to pay. The mining process is truly wreaking havoc on the environment. Its consequences are severe and far-reaching. The most obvious is the environmental damage, deforestation, soil erosion, and water pollution. But the process has also some social and economic consequences, leading to the exploitation of workers and child labor. Extremely unsafe working conditions make people sick. Additionally, the demand causes geopolitical tensions and even armed conflicts as countries compete for access to these resources. Again, you may think, okay, what can I do? That's life, it's not easy. Not like we can live without metals or mine them somewhere in space. You're right, life is not easy, but I won't be so sure about the impossibility of mining in space. There actually seems to be one object in the solar system where we can get some of those precious metals. And no, it's not Earth. This is not a fantasy of a crazy scientist. This is not science fiction. This is the reality with a very real NASA mission. the agency plans to send a spacecraft to a metallic space body that apparently costs 70,000 times more than the whole economy of planet Earth. Yep, you heard it right. 70,000 times more. Sounds insane. And I can already hear your questions. Where is this object? How do we even know that it contains metals? And when will we have the opportunity to start the mining process there? No worries, we have all the answers. Let's see how this metal badass was even discovered. How can it be useful to us, and why NASA decided to send a spacecraft there? Space mining. Is the upcoming NASA mission gonna make everyone a billionaire? For instance, let's talk about nickel, which is used in batteries, including rechargeable nickel-cadmium batteries. Currently, the price of nickel is around $23,000 per metric ton. As you can see, it has grown more than 3 times since 1980. In 2021, the global nickel market size was $31.5 billion. The main exporters of nickel and nickel products were Canada, the USA, Russia, UAE, and Norway. In 2021, only Canada exported nickel and nickel products worth $3.63 billion. It was followed by the USA with $2.2 billion. Nickel and nickel products make up a significant part of the export for some countries. For example, in 2021, Zimbabwe exported goods worth $6.03 billion. 20% of it, $1.24 billion, were nickel and nickel products. With every year, global nickel demand grows. It's expected to fourfold over the next 30 years as electric vehicles with batteries almost entirely replace traditional cars. However, metals are non-renewable, and their resources on Earth are extremely limited. Nickel deposits in Canada are expected to run out in 2032. Followed by the USA in 2034. In 2039, Russia most probably will also run out of nickel. So, what are we gonna do next? Well, one method is finding a good alternative to metals, and another way is mining metals in space. Yep, you heard it right. Mining in space. Let me show you where we can actually do that. Meet Psyche 16. A metal asteroid in the solar system. It was actually the 16th asteroid that was discovered by astronomers. That also explains the number in its name. Obviously, now we know about hundreds of thousands of asteroids, but back then in the 19th century, discovering an asteroid was kind of a big deal. The main character of this video was first noticed in 1852 by Italian astronomer Annibale de Gasparissa. He named it Psyche after the Greek goddess of the soul. Further studies of the object suggested that Psyche is made entirely almost of iron and nickel, just like the core of our planet. Only the Earth succeeded in forming the mantle, the crust, and everything. And Psyche, well, wasn't that lucky. Aside from iron and nickel, it apparently also has some rare metals like gold, platinum, copper, cobalt, iridium, and rhenium. The metallic composition sets Psyche apart from other big asteroids that are usually made from rock or ice. If it's really the remnant of a core of a protoplanet, then through studying the asteroid, we'll be able to learn a lot about the formation of our planet. This fact explains the major scientific interest in this asteroid, since we cannot directly study the core of our Earth. It is too deep, too hot, under immense pressure beyond our technological capabilities. Now, it seems like we've found the twin of Earth's core in our solar system, and it's a giant chunk almost entirely from metal floating in space. And it's not as hot as our core, so we can actually explore it. But where is Psyche located? Can we see it? Given that there's such a high interest in this object and the fact that it was discovered in the 19th century, you may assume that it's close to us. Well, I won't put it exactly like that. Psyche is chilling between Jupiter and Mars. The space between those two planets is known as the main asteroid belt in the solar system. It's home to millions of asteroids. Our metal buddy is located at a distance ranging from 378 million to 497 million kilometers. That's 235 million to 309 million miles from the Sun. That's 2.5 to 3.3 astronomical units. Just as a reminder that 1 astronomical unit is the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Psyche completes 1 orbit around the Sun in 5 Earth years. However, it takes just over 4 hours to rotate once on its axis. Using a combination of infrared emissions observations and different calculation methods, scientists estimate that Psyche is around 226 kilometers, 140 miles, in diameter. It is roughly equivalent to the state of Massachusetts in the United States or the island of Hokkaido in Japan. Additionally, the asteroid is massive enough that its gravitational perturbations on other asteroids can be observed. This enables mass measurement. According to the latest data, it's around 2.72 times 10 to the power of 19 kilograms. It's like around 130,000 Everests, or 4 billion pyramids of Giza. No wonder Psyche is one of the 10 most massive asteroids in the asteroid belt. It represents 1% of the belt's mass. Observations also helped scientists to determine its approximate shape. Apparently, Psyche looks like a potato. And just to clarify, there are no photos of Psyche yet. Everything you see here is just a 3D model. But wait. If there are no images and no spacecraft has ever been on this asteroid yet, how do we know that it contains metals? First, spectroscopy helped a lot with this. This technique analyzes the light reflecting off an object. It revealed that Psyche's surface reflects more light at certain wavelengths than asteroids composed of rock and ice. That fact indicated that its surface is largely composed of metal, possibly iron-nickel. That combination is much denser and more reflective than rock and ice. Additionally, observations of Psyche conducted by the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico also provided evidence for the asteroid's metallic composition. The radar reflections were consistent with a highly reflective surface. So it's highly unlikely that scientists are wrong about the composition of Psyche. But if this asteroid really contains all of these metals, can we all start mining there and become billionaires? Well, it has a potential economic value that we can't just ignore. NASA scientist Lindy Elkins-Tanton suggested that only the iron on the asteroid could be worth as much as $10 quintillion. Have you ever heard of such a number? Here it is. Yep, that's a 20-figure sum. Just to compare, the entire global economy is worth roughly $110 trillion. Now let's see those numbers together. Just wow. But there are a lot of buts here. First, new research from the University of Arizona has uncovered shocking evidence that challenges a long-held belief. According to the latest findings, Psyche seems to be less metallic and dense than scientists thought. Therefore, it may not be a failed planetary core, but a rubble pile. This means that the asteroid's scientific and economic value may be significantly lower than previously thought. Anyway, we won't know this for sure until we actually get physically closer to this asteroid. But is Psyche our only hope to find some precious metals in space worth our attention? Apparently not. Again, according to NASA, there are still plenty of asteroids rich in minerals in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. For instance, there's Davida, a large asteroid that is worth even more than Psyche because of its content of nickel, iron, cobalt, nitrogen, ammonia, and hydrogen. Look at this number. Yep, it's $27 quintillion. With an estimated value of $100 billion per person on Earth, the asteroids between Jupiter and Mars hold the promise of untold wealth. Obviously, if we can figure out how to mine there, and if we choose to distribute those resources equally, and if the price for those resources stays at the same level. A lot of ifs and buts, huh? Well, let's be honest here. The potential mining in space is more possible than equal distribution of resources. Also, we shouldn't ignore the technical challenges of mining on an asteroid. Robots and spacecraft for this don't exist, at least not yet. However, there's a high possibility that the asteroids will likely be mined sometime in the future. But once metals from Psyche actually reach the Earth, the influx of supply will most drive their prices to the ground. And here, the economy can change forever. Precious metals won't be precious anymore. And that actually answers our main question. Unfortunately, we all won't become billionaires when we start mining on Psyche. Or we will, but the inflation will be so high that those billions won't cost anything. On the other hand, if only one country comes up with the technology first and starts mining on the asteroid, it can drastically change the geopolitics on the planet Earth. This would hardly make humanity better in any sense. And as we've already hinted, one country is already taking steps toward exploring Psyche. America's space agency, NASA, plans to send a spacecraft to the asteroid. The mission is called Psyche. The spacecraft, surprise, surprise, is also named Psyche. But what's the point of sending a spacecraft to the asteroid? Is it going to start mining there? No, humanity doesn't have the technology for that yet. For now, NASA has more of a scientific interest. The agency had never explored a celestial body largely made of metal before. Additionally, if Psyche is really a partial core of a shattered planetesimal, it can tell us a lot about the formation of our own planet. Or maybe we'll just learn that the rubble theory was actually true. NASA equipped the spacecraft with the best technologies to get all the necessary information. Psyche spacecraft will use radio waves to measure the asteroid's gravity. Combined with maps of the asteroid's surface features, this should yield clues to the asteroid's interior structure. Sounds fancy and expensive. But actually, the Psyche mission is part of NASA's low-cost robotic space mission program. It's gonna cost something around $960.6 million to send this cutie to the asteroid. To compare, NASA's Perseverance rover project price tag was nearly $3 billion. Now that we know about the costs, it's time to learn about the timeline of the mission. Well, the mission was approved in 2017. The spacecraft was set to launch in August 2022 and arrive at the asteroid in 2026. However, due to some software issues and development problems, it missed its optimal launch window. Due to the postponement, once a 4-year journey will likely extend to a 6-year one because scientists missed the best possible alignment of the planets. They need to recalculate the energy needed to reach the destination because the orbital positions of Earth and Psyche will make for a longer distance to cover. Now the spacecraft is scheduled to enter orbit around Psyche in August 2029. It will spend there around 21 months gathering all the necessary information, and only then will we learn about the real nature of the asteroid. Of course, it will take years to study all the gathered materials. Only then it will be possible to tell if mining on Psyche will actually be worth it. At this particular moment, it would be much more effective and valuable to focus on minimizing the negative impact of mining on Earth and searching for alternatives to various metals. And in around 15 years or so, after scientists research the whole data from Psyche, we can start the real talk about mining outside our planet.